we're going to start with the first keynote. It's time to introduce our first speaker, Tim Vasko. Tim Vasko here? Yes, Tim, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. So Tim is the founder and CEO of UpStart Blockchain, the smart contract as a service platform at Infinius. So welcome to the stage. Tim, he's going to bring a great perspective. I mean, blockchain technology is huge. And I think it's great to have an expert like Tim joining us to share his perspective on how to be a global entrepreneur from day one, or day zero in his case, maybe. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for that warm welcome. And first of all, I'm going to start out by asking you to look up here. And I'm going to be looking up here, too, because I don't have any cheat sheets. And read this. This is pretty raw when we start thinking about what John Locke said in the 16th century. And what I'd like to ask everybody to think about for one moment is, if you could sum up in one word what the biggest challenge for the world is today. I'm not just talking about your business or being an entrepreneur, but for the world, what is it? One word. I'm not going to ask you to answer it just yet, okay? But what is it? Let's go ahead. What is it?
Belief. Belief in ourselves.
Belief.
AI.
Trust. Trust. You win. But belief, it's true. And so when I started my entrepreneurial career, I started thinking, well, you know, I get up in the morning, and what do I really have? So today's my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And, you know, really at the end of the day, isn't that it? Like, isn't that it? Isn't that really all we have? Isn't that what Locke was trying to say? Is at the end of the day, really at the end of the day, I mean the end of the day, you know what I'm talking about. It's all we have. It's what we come with and it's what we leave with. So then we have to say, well, once we get there, what's the next biggest thing? And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I came to these conclusions or these insights. But the next biggest thing is, well, when I face a challenge, because we start with trust, we trust our parents and we get there, and then we face a challenge, and what do? We get scared. And so Chögyam Trungpa, I can never say his name, a Buddhist master, said, you need to smile at fear. You need to have a conversation with fear. And you need to think about that. So, you know, I'm good with that, and I kind of studied that, and I went, that's good. I'm good with this. And then I thought, but what's that fundamental thing that always was behind every success and every failure? And believe me, I have some amazing failures. If you don't believe me, Google it. And it is always came down to one word, and it was trust. So, you know, as soon as I thought, I'm good with this, I got this, then the world happened. And you know what? That's what happens every day to us as entrepreneurs, is the world happens. It doesn't matter how good or confident we are, the world's going to happen. And in 2008, I was on an airplane. I get a call on my phone, you know, before you could use phones on the plane the whole time. And the flight attendant's going, turn it off. And I just heard my biggest customer just went bankrupt down in the States. And so I fly to New York. I walk in to Madison Avenue, to the offices, beautiful offices on Madison Avenue, go through the elevator, and there's all these boxes stacked up. And I'm like, this isn't good. And so I say, hello, and I hear this voice out of the back, hey, Tim, come on back. So I walk back, and there's Larry sitting there, his office still all set up. And I sit down in front of his desk, and he said, Tim, I'm not going to pay you. And I'm like, that much I figured out. And he said, but I'm going to do you a favor. He said, in 2 days, Bear's going out of business. You got any money in the market? I said, yeah. He said, get out. So right there from the desk, I made a phone call. I called my broker. I got out. And that saved me personally, financially, but it didn't save the world and what we all experienced. Why did I make that decision? Experience is a big part of it. in the mid-90s, I had built a very significant company, and I borrowed about $5 million on a line of credit, and this company, Finova Capital, stopped advancing on my line of credit. And I'm like, yeah, $15 million in assets, I'm a public company. Hello, what's going on? So I did a little research and found out they weren't advancing on lots of lines of credit. So I flew back to New York. I said, I know what you guys are doing. And they said, so what are you going to do about it? I said, I'm going to tell the world. And they crushed me. It was a $15 billion company. A few years later, they became the largest bankruptcy in the United States, the largest bankruptcy in the history of bond defaults, and 6 months later, Enron happened. So this didn't start in 2008. This is the world. This is what was going on. And even before that, it was in the 80s. It was in the 80s when I started as a young entrepreneur. So here we are, fast forward to 2018, and we get this concept of, well, what have we learned? Where have we come from? And just this summer, I love this book, of Bean Counters, How Accounts Broke Capitalism. And you go through this book. It's actually available on Amazon in the UK. And you go through this book and you start learning a little bit about how the people we trusted to give us real numbers weren't giving us the real numbers. They weren't giving us the real scoop. How do you pass an audit if you're HSBC when you've money laundered $1 billion? In 2012, they paid a $1.9 billion fine. I don't know about you guys, but I had my lines with HSBC in Canada. And they got called at the same time that this was all going on. So fortunately, I could write a check. And then, the philosophy of trust, that's out there. So what does all of this really mean? In 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto, who nobody knows who that is, I really wish I knew who that was. And I really wish I had his Bitcoins, or hers, or the group's. But they came up with this concept of, could we codify trust? Could we actually create a piece of code that said we don't need a government to create an exchange of value, because that's what money is. So at the end of the day, that became the global currency, right? This new global currency. How many people own Bitcoin? How many people would have liked to own Bitcoin when it first came out? Few of you wouldn't. That's amazing. But is that the real new global currency? It's not. What's the new global currency, really? That's it. We used to, I don't know if you knew this, but we used to have bank and trust. You remember the names, bank and trust and everything? In the 80s, in about 87, right before the crash back then, the regulators allowed banks to take trust out of their name. So it's really interesting that this model of trust is so ingrained in our culture. In God we trust. Does anybody know where that appears? On the dollar bill. That became a slogan of the United States in 1957. Do you know where else it was a slogan of, though, before that? New Westminster, Canada, in 1860, and it's still on the seal of New Westminster. In God we trust. Trust. So what's it about? Do we trust these people in our companies, in our careers? Do we trust Facebook? How many people trust Facebook? One guy out of billions of people trusts Facebook. No wonder you know about trust. Google. How many people trust Google? A few more. Okay, I'm not going to go there. And Equifax and so forth. More importantly, who trusts us? Do our customers trust us? Do our vendors trust us? Do the people we go out and make smart contracts with trust us? Think about that concept, smart contracts. A contract that knows everything that you did, you said, you started with, and you're supposed to do. And it reminds you, and it doesn't let you breach that trust. That's what this is about, right? I was explaining this blockchain to somebody the other day, a gentleman from Mumbai, and he goes, nobody can lie anymore. I'm like, aha, you got it. So, and more importantly, and this is personal, when we get married, when we have kids, I've got 5. I've got 5 kids. And, yeah, exactly. That's why I'm tired. And actually, I've got the most brilliant kids in the world. I don't just say that. John Locke came from my son, Dr. Vasko. He just got his PhD from Cornell, and he's a professor at Columbia. My daughter, who may be here somewhere in the room, is working on her PhD at Toronto. But I used to tell my kids, I said, guys, and I tell them all the time, even the little ones, 30 to 11, and I tell them all the time, I'm like, guys, don't tell me, show me. Show me. And they did. Boy, did they. So, why does trust matter? How does it affect each one of us? And as entrepreneurs, what will you do about it? How many people like to eat? A few you don't like to eat? That's good. How about this? Let's get the whole room. How many people eat? Come on. There's one guy back there that doesn't eat at all. But what I want to do is kind of shift this to why trust matters, okay? And what we can do about it, what we need to think about. Trust matters because it's at the very core of our food source. 33% of all food goes to waste, as much as 69% in Africa. Yet, entrepreneurs produce that food. The majority of the food, they feed 2 to 3 billion people. 1.4 billion people are overweight. 900 million go to bed hungry every night. 60% of them are the people who feed us. So what I want you to do today when you're eating lunch or dinner or the next time you go to a great meal, think about, do you trust where your food came from? Are you comfortable with that? Because increasingly we're not. Not only because maybe it's not the health kind of thing that we think about, our first world problems, how many calories and so forth, but maybe because of the way that food was produced. But in the world, there's about 10 companies, and this is called centralized control. About 10 companies that control all the food. How many people recognize these brands up here? Right? So do they have the authority and the power, and are they in a position that they could do something to really improve the world? And the answer is yes. What do they buy when they tell us about these brands? What are they trying to buy with their advertising? What are they telling us? We should trust them. Don't we see that all the time in advertising? So, of those people, there are 7.6 billion people in the world. 1.1 billion people don't have an identity. We couldn't trust them if we wanted to, because we don't even know who they are, right? How many people saw the thing with the kids in the Thai cave, right? And we're engrossed by it. But you know what was fascinating beyond the fact that they all survived and, the heroic acts of the people that saved them? Is at the end of this, what did we learn? They had no identity. They were stateless until that happened. So identity, this is the emerging world problems. Let's talk about the first world problems, our problems. Because you always need to think about, what are our problems? Our problems are things like my identity and identity theft. How many people care about that in this room? How many people care about your identity theft? Equifax breach. Somewhere, we don't really know, 160 million records breached and stolen. We didn't even give them permission to get our information. And it was breached. So these are the kinds of problems that we need to deal with, and what we need to deal with in our contracts, in our world, and even now mandatorily, we need to trust who's doing this. How do we know the person on the other side and the people doing this, or do we even know who they are? So there's a solution to that. The solution is this concept of blockchain and globalization and fundamentally entrepreneurship. Do we think that this is a solution? Look at how big this market has grown since 2008. We're talking about 10 years here, and we are approaching well over $1 trillion in investments. When I looked at this first in 2013, the CTA invited me to go have an office down in Silicon Valley, which I did. And I was at the Plug and Play Center, and my family was in Victoria, so I was commuting back and forth every couple of weeks, and I would be there at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was awesome because I heard this ruckus upstairs from where the Canadian Pavilion was, and I'd go up there, and it was a room loaded like this with lots of pizza. I went up for the pizza. I didn't really care what they were talking about. But while I was eating pizza, all these people were up there, and they were all the beginning blockchain Bitcoin guys. And I met the Ripple guys, and I met all these guys right at the very beginning. I went back down to my little quiet space, and Canada was very quiet. Canada's kind of really quiet in the world. And I sat there by myself, and I thought, what is this? And that's when I started working on blockchain. And that's when I started really getting into this concept of codified trust. So today, I went from from Canada to the United States. We've signed agreements in Africa, in Mauritius. In March this year, Africa became the largest free trade zone in the world through their agreement, bigger than the world WTO that was signed in 1995. And we're in India. We've been in India for 5 years. We're incorporated there. And all of that globalization goes through a single lens. And that lens is trust. And this is what blockchain looks like. Blockchain is about kind of this concept of public and private records and who has permission and what's permissionless, but in the center of that circle up there. And there's certain things we can do. We can create things. That's what we do as entrepreneurs. We can read it. We can write it. We can update it, but we can't delete it and we can't change it because it's distributed. There's no central authority. There's no Facebook. There's no Google. There's no Equifax. There's no bank. There's nobody that controls all of the data. Therefore, we have this ability to do this. So, where did this all come from? How many people know about John Nash and the Nash equilibrium? Okay, for all you guys that know about it, I'm not going to explain it. And for those that you don't, I'm not going to explain it because I'm not a mathematician. But what I'm going to talk about is what Nash and the almond theory are about. And it says that if people who have the same basic information have exposure to that, you cannot agree to disagree. It's immutable. We know what the other person's going to do. And we have to agree if we're rational. So immutable trust equals consensus. Think about that. So if you're going to go global or you're going to build your business, how many people think it's important that your customers, your prospects, your vendors trust you? There you go. There you go. So what we need to think about is that, if we're entrepreneurs, why are we entrepreneurs? And does it matter if we're entrepreneurs at all? How do we approach it? Well, let me tell you if it matters. 90% of all the new jobs in the world, you guys create. We all create them. 90%, that's a lot. And 70% of all of the food in the world is produced by smallhold farmers. Who are they really? What are they really? These are people that are entrepreneurs, aren't they? They're feeding their own families. They're doing it from their land. Not a lot of their land either. Only a quarter of the world's farmable land feeds us. Think about that. Who owns the rest? I don't know. So we always think of ourselves as innovators, but this is also a call to governments and economies because innovation that we build also relies on innovation, doesn't it? How many people have ever had trouble getting capital for their business? Wow. Even the guy that doesn't eat raised his hand. So what we see today is this concept of fintech, underbanked, non-banking, breaking these walls and breaking these barriers where we trusted, but 77% of the time, we can't even get a bank loan. but we're building 90% of the jobs. So what I want you all to do is point at me right now. Point at me. Come on, point at me. Where are the other three fingers pointing? That's right. So when we think about that, we have to think about who's ultimately responsible for everything that they do. Really. When you walk in here, it's you. And we have to think about, when we think about that, it's pretty raw, isn't it? You know, I didn't want to get up here and do this. Because this is it. This is all you get. There's this great comedian, John Mulaney. Look him up. And he says, I'm 35 years old. I'm not 35. And I'm like the iPhone. Just worse versions of this from here. Right? And so the reality is, it's raw. And when there's a challenge, we have to go look at the outside, but it has to be this inside perspective. So when I say, what are you going to do about it? I'm just giving you a few little pointers and a few little things. But it's so fundamental what we're seeing with this concept of trust. So how many people have woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning and said, now what? Just a few of you. If you're not waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and if you are, call me. But if you're not taking big enough risks. Huh? Well, I always go to sleep and then get up. I'm awful at 9, but call me at 2. And when we start getting this, you know, we need to look at that. We need to say, we're not taking enough risks if we're not doing that. And if we're not looking at those three fingers pointing back at us, we're really not expanding our business and doing what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to get out there and we're supposed to create innovation. We're supposed to take advantage of innovation. And the one thing I could encourage everybody here to do is to think about, am I right? Is this a fundamental shift? Is this not the biggest shift that we've ever seen in our probably careers, starting with the internet? I was back there in 1999. I was at the very first web conference. I still have the Adobe mug that I got. I got an Adobe mug, and I got a Google blanket that was embroidered. I wish I would have got their stock. And so at the end of the day, we do all this exploring, and then we come back to where we were at the very beginning. And where were we back in the 16th century? Where were we when all of this started? You know what we had? We had handshakes. We had trust. You trusted your neighbor. You trusted your family. You trusted the people you did business. You trusted your currency. You trusted your country. You trusted the companies and the organizations set up to give you help as an entrepreneur, to help you feed your family, to help you achieve something. And haven't we come full circle now? But that concept of in God we trust has changed a little bit because God is subjective. It's a little bit different to all of us. Today, it's in code we trust. And that's what blockchain's about. That's what the world's about. And in my opinion, I believe that's what we're about as entrepreneurs. If we go out, we step out, we take that risk, we take those three fingers and we trust all of those instincts we have and we look at ourselves and we say, I'm going to go into this new market. I'm going to go establish this new product. I'm going to risk myself and put it out there. I don't know what's going to happen. But people can trust me. Now, how are you going to codify that? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Team Vasko. Thank you. So that was an amazing keynote speaking, team. Thank you so much. And it's his birthday, so happy birthday again. Joyeux anniversaire. Congrats. You know, there's a tagline that characterizes every entrepreneur is passion led us here. And you have seen the passion on team. How he speaks, with the passion, the drive. Don't you want to work with him? Don't you want to hang out with him? Don't you want to help him? Just because of the energy. It's the passion. He could be doing everything today. It's his birthday. He has 5 kids. Psychopath. He's here sharing his story, sharing his passion. So the same passion that Tim is showing, you have somehow to build your own story. Because that's the methodology that's going to help you to get co-founders, employees. And let's be honest, if you're passionate enough and you're articulate enough on how to, convince people to help you, you're going to have a lot of people helping you for free. Just because they want to help you achieve something. People are looking for visionaries. So be a visionary like Tim.